This is the Luke Thomas Show on Sirius XM Rush 93.
All right, we're back. Luke Thomas Show. Hope everyone's doing well in Radio Land. 844-796-7874. Get at me on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas, and of course Snapchat the Luke Thomas 79. All right, joining me now on the hotline. This is gonna be fun. Okay, have you guys heard the Serial podcast? Chances are you maybe have. 130 million downloads for season 1. It was incredible. I listened to the whole thing, and at the end of it, we were all wondering, geez, is Adnan Syed going to get a fair shake in the judicial system? And it turns out yesterday, his conviction was vacated. He is getting a new trial, and one of the key figures in making that possible joins us now on the hotline, the one and only Susan Simpson. Susan, welcome to the Luke Thomas Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. All right, so let's back up a little bit for our listeners here. You are by trade an attorney, is that right?
Yes, I do primarily white-collar defense work.
And you also are you are a podcaster as well. You have a podcast, and I believe it's called Undisclosed, and it followed the whole serial Adnan Syed injustice issue, right?
Yeah, first season ended up being kind of born out of some blogs that I kept, and that also Colin Miller and Rabia Chowdhury kept on their own. And we started talking because of that, and we decided that, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff here that Serial didn't cover. Maybe we should do a podcast too. Okay.
So that brings us, we're going to sort of circle back here a little bit, and that brings us to yesterday. I guess the conviction was vacated. Now, do we know if Adnan Syed is out of jail? Is he out on bail yet?
No, he is not. There's not been a motion yet for a bail. I believe his attorney intends to do that, but that will not happen immediately, and there's no guarantee it'll be granted.
Okay. Now, in the course of following this as a fan and then as a blogger and as an attorney, and it's three different perspectives all sort of combined into one, at what point did you realize not merely was this sort of a fascinating legal issue or a mystery on its own terms, but that there may have been a real, true injustice in terms of someone getting a fair trial?
I thought that was possible from the start just because the case is so messed up. But there's plenty of messed up cases with the guilty defendant, so that's not a guarantee on its own. But really, the more I got into it, the more I looked beyond the podcast, the more just reading the source materials, everything kept not adding up. And eventually, I don't even know when exactly, but at some point, enough came together where I realized I did not believe this man was guilty anymore.
Now, I'm not sure if he's guilty or innocent, but I certainly don't feel like he got a fair trial, which is sort of interesting because we had some of O.J. Simpson's attorneys on last week to talk about the documentary made about him. But here's the question I'm not sort of clear on, and we'll get to explain this in just a second. You found evidence related to the inaccuracy of cell tower in terms of what it says about someone's location. Are you working with the defense? Like, how did you guys link up that this information became available?
I am not his attorney at all. He's not my client, so it's not that, not like that. But Rabia, who's on the podcast, is a family friend of Adnan's, and she has worked closely with them all the way through, keeping his case alive, helping them to organize things, helping him find an attorney. So she knows Justin Brown, and she had talked to him, and so they talked regularly. And through that, Justin learned some of the stuff we'd found, and he ultimately included the cell phones issues in his PCR hearing.
All right, so the judge rejected one thing that you did not have any relationship to, which was the alibi of Asia McClain. She said that there's no way Adnan could have committed these crimes because he was with me. The judge ultimately did not take that into account. Can you tell us why?
Well, the judge, it's an interesting decision. He definitely found her credible. When I first saw the one-page order that came out saying the new trial's granted, it also says that he's denying the issue related to H. McClain, the alibi, and I was wondering why that was, because I was at the hearing too. I saw her testify, and she was very credible, I didn't see much of a reason to doubt her story, and I was wondering if somehow the judge had. It turns out he did not. He found her credible. He believed what she said. He didn't see any reason to doubt the truth of it. But to boil it down, he found that, well, the case was already such a mess, already such a disaster from a factual standpoint, that adding one more mess to it wouldn't have affected the jury's decision. If the jury was going to convict based on the timelines and everything else that already didn't make sense, the fact that it makes a little bit less sense wasn't substantial enough to warrant a new trial.
I don't know that I understand that logic. Do you understand that logic?
I understand it from a gut level because, at a certain sense, I kind of agree. The case was a mess. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical, and the jury still convicted. So at what point do you say, okay, it was really illogical before, but now it's super, super illogical, so I'm going to quit? But I think legally there's some precedent that didn't actually exist at the time of the hearing. It's come out since then that pretty much rules against this argument strongly because it does matter. The defense has an alibi that didn't come out. If there's something solid that the defense attorney can hang her hat on, that is a big deal. And that can be used to fight back against the confusion and saying, well, yes, there's a mess here and a mess here, but here's what we know what happened at the exact same time that the state claims that the defendant was committing the murder. He wasn't there. So, yes, there's a mess elsewhere in this case that we don't know what's going on, but we know this one fact. He was not at the Best Buy at 2:36 p.m.
Yeah, it's weird. I've sat on a number of juries, never for a murder trial, but here in D.C. I get called to jury duty all the time. I live in D.C. as well.
Oh.
Yeah, I get called all the time, and if I was sitting in a jury and there was a bunch of information that was hard to discern its truth value, but you had an alibi, that to me would seem to tilt the case pretty clearly in one direction or the other, but let's forget that for just a moment. The big thing here is what you discovered relative to the technology about can you determine someone's location based on where their cell phone, I guess, pinged a tower. So tell me first what it is you discovered and what information you gave to the defense for them to use.
I kind of hate saying I discovered it because it was there all along, and it was actually something the phone company told the prosecution. It wasn't like some hidden fact or some secret that I managed to stumble across. It was literally the cover letter from the phone company that said, well, here are the phone records. Here's how you read them. By the way, and in bold and all caps, incoming calls are not reliable for location status. But wow. I guess it had been, possibly overlooked or possibly ignored. And it's clear that Gutierrez never saw it. But what I realized pretty quickly is that it's also clear that the state's own expert hadn't seen it, because in addition to talking about reliability, it gives some basic explanations on how to read the phone records. Like, if you see this, it means this. If you see that, it means that. And one of the instructions was contrary to what the state's expert said. And it concerned basically a voicemail issue when a call was being made to check voicemail versus when a call was going to voicemail. And it was an error that the state's expert, I could not see he would have made that if he'd had the cover sheet. If he'd been given the instructions, he would have known what was going on. So I was able to confirm that indeed he had never seen instructions. He had not been told about basically the source of this data, or been made aware of possible concerns and how it was stored, how the database worked, how it was retrieved. And that was all stuff that would have been critical to his testimony had he known, because he was an engineer. He worked with engineering data straight from the switch. And the data that the prosecution was using to try and show where Adnan supposedly was based on the billing records, which, in the way the phone company had it set up, different sets of records, different purposes. And there's clearly something it's not wrong, because it's correct for the purposes that they used it for, the phone company did. But when you start using it to track location, it doesn't add up.
So is the location random, or is the location just so it just lacks too much approximation for us to say with any kind of reasonable degree of certainty?
Yes, both those I think are true. But on this appeal, on this PCR hearing, it was the former that was the more important issue. It's not random. One of the errors, and there's more than one here, but one of the big errors is that when AT&T stores information, it's not making a distinction between the caller and the receiver of a call when both sides are from an AT&T cell phone. So you don't know who the caller is either. So you can't go back and check and cross-reference or whatever. But for an incoming call, you have no idea if it's showing the caller's cell tower or the person receiving it.
That is craziness. And none of this was introduced. So, okay, so you brought this up. His attorney used this. The judge ultimately decided this was grounds to vacate the conviction. Is that how I understand it correctly?
Yes, he found that the attorney, a Goodyear at the trial, was constitutionally ineffective for failing to raise when you boil it down, it's a pretty basic point. The data can't be used for the reason it was used at trial, and the phone company stated very clearly, don't use it this way. And yet they did. And if she had simply brought this fact up, the state's own expert, he's clear. He says, has a strong belief in the accuracy of data and having scientific results. And if the source of that data is not going to stand by it, he's not going to stand by his analysis of it.
I guess the only thing I don't understand is how can you have a state's expert where if the phone company is telling you this is the current state of technology, how can you have an expert, even if you didn't see the sheet, that thinks otherwise? Right? Shouldn't they be in lockstep that the expert about these kinds of matters knows the same sorts of things that the phone company does?
Well, the expert was from the phone company. He was just from the engineering division. And it's not that the records are wrong. It's just they were never intended to be used this way. When AT&T designed the databases and kept billing records, it was concerned about not violating laws in terms of billing and making sure it accurately billed customers for what they actually owed. It never crossed its mind to be concerned, oh, by the way, if someone's going to use this data to try and convict a murderer, make sure it's accurate for that too.
Right. I see.
The police kind of piggybacked on it and tried oh, look, we can use it for this. But it was never designed that way. And in this case, part of the issue was that the expert was what happened is the prosecution went to AT&T and said, hey, we want an expert. So they grabbed one of their engineers and said, okay, you go to court and start talking about this stuff. But the engineers never worked with billing data. They had no reason to. That's not what they did. The billing data had a very specific purpose, which is charging people. So he didn't know how it operated.
So the prosecution tries to say there's motive. That's a little hard to come by, but it's not, I guess, otherwise impossible to imagine why, right? But there's no forensic evidence tying Adnan Syed. Now we had, which was a key component, the cell phone tower, geolocation. That's no longer a component of the prosecution. The only thing that's really left of substance would be the comments of Jay. I would ask you about those because after this trial, I'm sure quite well, he gave some comments to, I believe, The Intercept, if I'm not mistaken, or some publication, where he made a bunch of contradictory comments related to things he said before, or at least again during, of course, the collection of evidence for this. There's so many problems with this. Where do things stand with getting? I guess now that it's been vacated, it doesn't matter. But maybe what's your opinion about all of the contradictions that Jay has made in subsequent statements?
It's not even subsequent ones. Every time Jay has given a statement to the police, a trial, whenever, it's different every time. He's never given the same story twice. So it's not really a surprise that when he talked now, he was different once again, which again is why I'm curious to see how the state pull off a retrial, because everyone knows when Jay gets back there again, we're going to get an entirely new story, in addition to the 9 he's already given. But, my personal belief at this point is that Jay had nothing to do with the crime, which is why his stories are all over the place, because he doesn't know anything. Not everyone agrees with that.
So, okay, but then why would he say all these things if he knows nothing and did nothing?
For the same reason, lots of people in Baltimore and elsewhere do that, because they want to escape charges themselves. The police told him, start talking about Adnan, or you're getting charged with murder. And he testified to that, and the cops testified to that. So we know that's how it was set up for him. And he made what to him, and actually might have been objectively the smart choice, which is to start talking and say what the cops wanted him to say.
Is the evidence from the first trial going to be admissible in the second one? And by that I mean Jay made a bunch of statements. We now know them to not be consistent whatsoever. This will be available to the defense?
Yeah, well, if Jay testified at a new trial, then yes, they would use those statements to impeach him, which basically means have Jay make a new statement, then pull up all the documents of all the times he said something totally different.
Okay, so let's go through this real quickly. I know you're a lawyer, and I appreciate your time. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this as a non-lawyer. You don't have forensic evidence. You don't have the cell phone towers. Let's assume they don't put Jay on there because it'd be like putting, again, to watch the OJ trial, like putting Mark Furman on, and then you just hammer him with all the inconsistencies. So you can't use him. What on earth could the prosecution possibly use?
I have no idea. This is why I can't get over the feeling there will never be a retrial, because it'd be a circus, and not in a good way, because what would they do? They'd have nothing to rely on. If I was given the task of trying to prosecute Adnan Syed at this point, oh God, I don't even know where I'd try and start.
So game this out for me. The state could appeal this vacation, or not the vacating, I should say, of the previous conviction. They might do that, or they might go for the retrial. Which one do you think they'll do?
I think it's going to be the appeal. They're going to, within the next 30 days, file a notice of appeal. So they'll have 40 days from there or thereabouts to actually file a brief, at which point Adnan's attorney writes a brief, and then they go to a hearing, and then there's a decision there, and they appeal again. And then the same process repeats a few more times until they get to the end of that.
And so how long do you think this will be?
It could be anywhere. If we were lucky, it'd be a year. It could be 3 years or more.
And so the only other challenge that remains for Adnan's attorney is to free him in the interim, if that is at all possible, right?
Yes. I mean, as of yesterday, he is an innocent man. His conviction has been overturned. He's still being held pending the state's next move, but he may be charged with a crime, but he's still entitled to bail, or entitled to move for bail in the meantime. And in most cases, a murder or someone charged with murder does not get bail, but plenty of times they do. And given the unique situation here, I think he has a really strong argument to make in favor of bail. So even if the appeals take years to wind through, he could be released much sooner.
The only people I feel bad for Adnan is presumed that he is innocent, but the other part of this is that I believe the victim's family has come out and said that this is extraordinarily painful for them, and I suppose that it is. What do you make of their comments? They seemed certain that Adnan is guilty no matter what.
The family is in the worst position of everyone, of course. They can't win here. There's no good outcome for them, except possibly in some distant day, perhaps the person who killed their daughter would be found and brought to justice. But in the meantime, they're left with uncertainty, guilt over possibly having help with maybe wrongful conviction. I will not judge a victim's family for whatever they say in times like this, because it's not their responsibility. It's not on them, and they don't have any good choices here.
So if you want to follow Susan, you can. It's at The View from LL2. What does that mean?
It's so in law school we had a library, a level of it called the lower level 2, the very, very lowest one with no windows. It was kind of a law joke, I guess.
It's a very macabre law joke.
Yes. And you can also follow our podcast at Undisclosed Pod. We have a new season starting up next week with a different case we're going to follow, which I think is going to be just as interesting as Adnan's case has been.
Okay, but you're going to follow this one too, right? I mean, this just seems like a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah, we'll keep following Adnan's case too. But there are plenty of people out there in the same position he's in.
All right, before we let you go, last question, Susan. Really appreciate your time. Give me a percentage chance that in 5 years, Adnan Syed is walking the streets as a free man.
Oh, God, I hate these kind of questions. But 80 to 90. I feel really good about it. I think it'll take a while. I think the road ahead is going to be bumpy, but it's hard not to be optimistic.
There we go. Susan Simpson, tremendous work. My wife and I were huge fans of the first season. And if, in fact, this is an injustice, I'm glad someone is writing it. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
There she goes. All right. Back to some MMA talk. I appreciate everyone's patience. We come back. We'll circle back to some of these topics about UFC 200. And we're going to give away some passes to International Fight Week for the UFC Fan Expo. If you want to go to the UFC Fan Expo, you got to get yourself there. But if you're going to be in Las Vegas, we are going to give away some tickets next. Luke Thomas Show. Stick around.
Fights, fashion, fists, and foreplay. We're talking about it in your home for Covino and Rich in the mornings and Combat Sports. Sirius XM Rush 93. Don't change that dial.
That was really, really good.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
What do you think?